where to begin. Maybe I'll begin with last year was a celebration for 30 years of Chisenhale Dance Space, which maybe many of you know, Chisenhale, which sort of gravitated from the X6 space in Butler's Wharf. And it was a 30-year celebration last year. And during that celebration, I was there with other artists of the time, Emmeline, and Amara belongs to a collective who were in residence there, looking at periods of Chisenhale in terms of art, the archiving and the legacy. And I was in a discussion with them. They were making a performance, and there was a discussion about what I was doing then, and there's very little documentation or video or of that period, and somehow I began thinking about this particular piece that I made in 1984 for 13 women. I'd been very, I was a huge fan of a band called the Raincoats, of which Anna is one member, and I'd been doggedly going to their gigs for a number of years and obsessively listening to tracks. I don't know if people do that, but when you have a track that you play again and again and again and again and again, and you just can't get it off the whatever mode of listening device you're listening. In those days it was record, vinyl or cassette. And this one track, Shouting Out Loud, was really calling to me, and I wrote to the Raincoats. There's a fan letter on that Anna kept. And I asked if I could use the track to begin making a piece of performance work, a dance for 13 women. And Anna kindly agreed, and we set about making this work, which grew into about 30 to 3 minutes long. And Anna and I collaborated. So the track, Shouting Out Loud, is the song, which is about 4 minutes, something like that, 4 to 5 minutes. And then there's a whole soundtrack that we collaborated on. Gathered 13 women together, rehearsed for, I think, 5 Saturdays in a row, maybe consecutively, and performed at Riverside Studios for Dance Umbrella in the autumn of 1984. And then went on to perform the piece at Chisenhale, and then in 1985 we did 3 nights at the ICA, interestingly in a season called Not Quite Dance, or Not Dance. It's on the So even then in 1985, notions of what dance could be, notions of what dance is, were already being questioned. And things that interest me that we can talk about is how much of the time that we live in inevitably or not inevitably impacts on the work we make. So during that piece, miners' strikes, squatting, gay pride, feminism, Thatcherism was raging. Do these consciously or unconsciously infect, or do these affect our making? Of course, having this 30-year period to reflect on, I can see clearly, yes, they do. But when I was 24, it was very unconscious. So that might be something for us to think about. Language, the physical language we're using, the dance language, at the time was very radical. Now perhaps we take walking, running, rolling, stillness, anatomical images for granted, or maybe not. Maybe we don't take them for granted. But then it was truly radical in terms of the landscape. that had existed and was also with us. So it's been really interesting, kind of, with the collective of dancers we have now. 3 of the originals are in the piece. Mary Prestige, a wonderful dancer from the X6 days, before that in Ballet Rambert, and before that a wonderful gymnast. Jessica Loeb, who is also an Aikido practitioner and a singer and lived at Butler's Wharf. We were in a number of collaborative collectives together. And Lucy Fawcett, a yoga practitioner and still moving. And I've contacted all the original dancers. Some of them are going to be coming along, then some of them lived in Canada or France. Or so I think that's about as much as I want to say in terms of the structure remains the same in the Reconstruction. The order, with my hand on my heart, is fuzzy. But rather than get really concerned with the actuality of the original in terms of the order of material, I've really gone with my intuition. And I believe we will make the piece that we need to make now, which will have a great deal of essence, and archive material will be there, but it is about the group that I am working with now, reclaiming in a way, or claiming their contribution. Because the material, in essence, is a collective one. A collective decision is being made in the space at every moment for every individual. I didn't know this language then. I didn't have much language when I was 24. So, yeah, that's a big thing for me. Yeah. Anna, can you remember anything?
No, it's well, with the music, Gaby wrote me that letter that she just mentioned. And then I had this idea of, at the end of that song, of the Raincoat song, I used an Indian instrument, which is called a Shruti box, which is it's a meditation instrument, although I never did meditation in my life, but that's what it is. And it's got, it's a bit like...
squeeze box?
Yeah, it's a bit like that, but you sort of go like that, and you know, and the sound comes through. So because I used that at the end of the song, I thought, oh, I'll extend it and use that instrument, and go from there. And then, so I did quite a long thing. I don't think I did it that long to start with, but it was just things.
But every week it grew.
I told Gaby, I'll do 5 minutes more or less of this, that.
And then I was like, I have
and
another
then you can
chunk.
do just 3 minutes, and then she'd use all the 5 minutes, and then you know it's like that. And it was very loose, and then I thought I'd just bring other things in, so that there was that basis of the Shruti box, and then there's all sorts of other things. There's little tunes, the sound of water running, trains, traffic, percussion, and things just come in and out a bit, I suppose, a little like Gaby's dance piece. Things just come in, go out, and evolve in different ways, and so it kind of, I think in a way it sounds a bit spontaneous. It's not a structure that makes only sense in that way. Things are quite sound fluid, although obviously we use this, we used a cassette then, we use a CD now, and it'll be the same piece every night, but or in every performance. But that's how I feel about it. The song, I must say that it's about. I think I just wrote that the other day because it's coming out on another compilation in Rough Trade. It's about. I wanted to sort of portray an atmosphere of solitude. That's how I put it, and it's sort of you being in a time, in a space, in yourself, and what surrounds you, and I think it kind of goes with how Gaby does things, I suppose. You must do, because you chose it.
Yeah, and we went on to have several collaborations after our initial Shouting Out Loud. There were several, and the film Freefall, with Anna made the score for Freefall. Yeah. Anna.
Yeah, Gaby, I just wanted to maybe pose a few questions,
yeah,
so that
please
it generates
do.
a bit of discussion
Yeah.
as well, hopefully.
Good.
Do you want to say a bit more about the way in which you work with the dancers that you're working with today, and the spread of that group, and the kinds of strategies that you used in workshops and rehearsals to remake this piece?
Yeah. Well, the big difference with the Reconstruction is the generational difference. So we have women in their 60s, 50s, and then we have women in their 40s, 30s, and then we have some students, the youngest being 18, 19. So I guess that's a really difference from the original, where more or less everybody was in the same, maybe between mid-20s and mid-30s. So that's a big, and that has had some impact in the material in terms of physicality. So there's quite a lot of running. Is everybody comfortable with running? Is there a potential that people might have a little injury or a little niggle? So, can we create the atmosphere and the energy in our walking even though it's running? So that's a simple difference, but a big one in terms of the material. I think what I've noticed, and Amara's part of the Reconstruction, is that although the material is improvisational, the clarity of the spatial relationships and where the material happens is very specific. And the material is improvisational, but the configuration and the clarity of the material is also very specific. If anyone wants to ask me more about that, I can elaborate.
An example.
So, if you're rolling down your spine with the skull initiating the roll, then you would be very specific with that first moment when the skull tips and how that leads the rest of the spine down towards the floor. Is there space around your shoulders, around your throat? How do you put the weight into the floor? And then which direction will you be facing? So it's kind of, yes, these are familiar activities to us, like rolling down the spine, but what are the details in that? And what are the details in relationship to another person, the other people in the room? So that was just, I think there's also, we roll, there's a moment where we do roll, but within that rolling, you will be very specific to left or right, and you'll continue that roll until you meet another body. Then when you meet another body, you pause, you take a moment to absorb that you are next to another body. What's going on? What's going on for you in that moment that two bodies meet? How does it feel? Yeah? So it's registered in terms of relationships. Relationship to the material, and then relationship to every other dancer in the room as much as possible. 360 degrees. A lot of the material is face fronting, but continuously I'm feeding in information about the back, about the back, about the back, about the back of the skull. How's it at the back of your pelvis? The 360 degree nature of our physicality. So yeah, I think it's just those attention to detail.
I think when you used the word radical earlier, I think this is what was happening then, which was really radical in that it was a time then of coded dance. I mean, everybody was into the spectacle. That's what was happening. And then what had come out of the 70s and what you were working with in these early 80s outside of that context was that whole sense of being somatically aware and being in relationship with, as a whole person, with another.
Yeah.
And I think that's what got missed out of the spectacle. And maybe we're constantly trying to find
That's the individual is key to this work, or I feel, hopefully, my work, in that and that's why I talk about the collective importance of each person, because their contribution is everything, really. Of course, there's a structure and a form and a container, but their contribution is really important, and I want to see the person. This, again, is maybe very familiar language to us now, but I feel sometimes that even though we know this, or we can use this as a preference, it gets lost. So sometimes, can we adjust the material for the individual? Yes, we can, if that gives that individual greater presence in the piece.
There are interesting issues there around the fact that now it's moved across a number of generations, and so obviously there is going to be some adjustment of the material to suit that new context. I wonder about the kind of limits of that as well. We talked earlier about whether or not it would be possible to remake this work on male dancers, and although it adjusts to the individual, is there a point where it comes to where it cannot adjust to a particular type of person or a particular identity?
Yeah, I feel that the ownership of the material for the people, like, it's really important to me that those 3 original members are in the piece. It's like, I could have chosen 3 other 60-year-olds, but they carry the legacy of the memory, of the body memory, and the emotional memory. I think those 3 women are probably having a very hard time right now. One of them, their father died during the piece. One of them, there's all kinds of things that trigger, your memory. And when you're involved in a piece of work, that especially with a group where you really, truly bond, those memories are playing around, not just in the physicality of the memory of the piece, but everything else associated. Who your lover was, where you lived, what your mother was doing, if you were fighting with your sister, those things all come up. So I think it can really provocate memory. The male issue is really important to me. I made this piece specifically for women. This is a piece of work for 13 women. I didn't have an interest in Shouting Out Loud being a piece for men. That doesn't mean men aren't welcome to watch. I have made, pieces where men were, but this piece is an expression of mine for women performers. And it's really clear for me. And I think sometimes we don't necessarily ask why the ballet boys exist, or if Matthew, we do ask, but there's not really any problem with it, is there? And so it's really important for me to say this piece of work is made for women, and it exists for women to perform.
So how, I'm going back to 1994 and I think about the group of women that you worked with, and yes, of course, it had to happen. That's what we were doing. You're working with some young women now? How are they with that? What was there, how did you discuss that with them, and how?
There's Jessie, and none of them are here.
I'm just thinking about the different eras. A dirty word.
This is really important. This is really important because I've just raised a daughter. She's 18 now, and I think this is pivotal also to why now. Things have changed for better and for worse inevitably every generation has things that are good and things that are not so good. I'm very, very excited about the students in this work who have been, all the students that are in the workshops, who have been open with the material, focused. There wasn't one person in all those workshops who wasn't focused. It was beautiful. It was exciting. I was really impressed. I didn't know what to expect. And I think that also maybe talks about the language becoming more familiar. So when you ask people to run and walk and be still and exchange places and have an awareness of the back of their skull, this language isn't so unfamiliar as it was. So is this language, which was radical, is it now integrated into our dance world? I think it probably is.
But what's specific about women's bodies for this? I'm still with this kind of idea that this was for women.
Well, it's not just the body, it's the whole person. So it's the experiences that women carry. In this piece of work, they wear dresses, there's running, there's different intimacies in terms of carrying, holding, laying. I'm interested in the person, and gender is part of that. And in this instance, I knew it was really clear for me that this was 13 women. And images of a collective notion of women at night, in the day. It was about, and I feel that the women, the younger women, the students, well, I just feel like they're really competent. They are very engaged. I don't know what their experience is, but they seem to be all very excited. I mean, Amara, do you, being a woman, being a performer and a woman in the work so far, would you say the different ages and how that relates to you in terms of like a mid person in the group, sort of?
One of the things that really struck me in the first rehearsal was that, so there's one first year in the piece and 3 second years in the piece from Roehampton Dance, BA. And I went up to the first year, Natasha, and I said, "Are you okay?" Because it was her first week at Roehampton. And here she is, like...
and she did the solo, didn't she?
And she did a solo. So Gaby was like, could you do this? So the beginning, it starts with Natasha walking around the space on her own. I mean, it was, what an introduction to Roehampton dance, I thought, and sets a kind of path for the next 3 years of her undergraduate here. She, it's hard to tell, like what's going on for anyone, because also we've got three rehearsals to reconstruct a piece. There's a lot. That's not a lot of time. But she comes back every week, and that's a good sign, I think. We all do. That's a really good sign. I mean, it's a very special experience to be with to be in this kind of intergenerational process. And actually, one of the things that I remember Gaby saying, because when we talked about it in some circles, Gaby saying, it kind of shouldn't be special, really. But it is, and also one of the things that you said is that when it was made in '84, all of the women in that piece were under the age of 35, or mostly under the age of 30. So it must have had a very different resonance to see 12, 25-year-olds and 13 sort of nearly 30-year-olds perform a piece to what you're going to see when you come on Wednesday, or to Chisenhale if you come there. We have to pick each other up. Don't want to give everything away. But, to approach a woman in her 60s and attempt to kind of pick her up is very different to picking up a 19-year-old, to very different to picking up a 40-year-old. somehow these negotiations, like, I don't want to hurt anyone, but I also don't want to avoid picking up a 60-year-old. I think these considerations were not part of the first iteration of it.
Yeah, I mean, what you've just, in essence, coming back to the material, is that the whole time you are making decisions. You know, it's such a. I think there was one young woman in the workshop when we explored the material. She said, I'm a really big talker and I'm always busy, and I can't believe that I've been so absorbed, I don't think she used the word absorbed, but in this material. And I found myself just staring out the window, and I don't know where I've been. I've been in the workshop, but I've been somewhere else. And I think this negotiation that goes on in the work the whole time, where you're making decisions, it's like something has to let go in order for it to drop into moving, because of the process of decision making. So you're not constantly in your brain, otherwise you wouldn't be able to put one foot in front of another. And it's that balance that's going on the whole time that's really exciting for me to watch, because you're really seeing people making these decisions, but it's a dance. That process is a dance the whole time, as opposed to potentially it would be different if you saw something very set.
A quick question.
Yeah, no.
So the three original dancers that are now in the piece, have you found that in that process and the decision making that they're refinding old material from the original, or are they just kind of almost going back to old material, or are they completely discovering new material because they're very, well, not the same person, but in a different place?
Yeah, I mean the actual material, or the score, the instructions, or is more or less the same. So within that framework, but I think they are finding old things and new things. I mean, it is this kind of. I think they're having a sort of deja vu bit by bit, and I think also with memory, you also invent things. So I think they're probably being quite inventive.
But also each person is themselves, so that is there again, but a changed person
Absolutely.
at the same time.
Yeah.
I think it's so interesting to be doing this with a piece that wasn't recorded on video, because so many of the sort of academic questions now are around what's a reenactment and what's a reconstruction, and in a sense you're before all that time, because actually there isn't any way you could either do either. You've got to you've got to be working with, I guess, what we would call
Reinventing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you have.
I just wondering.
But Gaby has notes. There's photographs.
Yeah. So all the notes that. Yeah. So there's a
You
very
had notes and you had images.
Yeah. And they've all. Yeah.
And Mary brought notes, didn't she,
Yeah.
on that first
Yeah.
day that you'd never seen before?
Well, I sent out the original score and invitation was on 3 pages, and I sent that to each of the dancers. So no internet, no email.
Handwritten.
Most people sort of had landlines then, but some people didn't. Phone boxes, tom-tom drums, old school. It was a really different time.
I think also that the idea of reconstruction in the kind of traditional sense sort of assumes that the original work was very static, whereas actually what you seem to be highlighting is a kind of looseness about the original structure, where it's a structure with very specific instructions or qualities of movement that you're interested in working with.
Yeah.
But in terms of the overall look of the piece, that can change and alter to some extent.
It changes from
within those
performance to
parameters.
performance.
It always
anyway.
changes.
You get different
It
people
does.
doing different
Yeah.
things, so each time is a reconstruction in a way.
Absolutely. And this collective responsibility is sometimes, because of the nature of the fullness, I feel, of every individual, feeling they have a fullness within each segment of the material, what happens is somebody may be ready to go on to the next bit of material and someone hasn't finished. So there's this dance going on where collectively you have to be aware of everybody else's process, which is a huge responsibility. So you can push the material along, but you have to wait for everybody else. So it's this negotiation of the collective responsibility to the material that's happening as well. And that's the same then, and that's the same now.
Yeah.
So the principles behind the material are exactly the same. The performers, some of them are different. The ethos is the same.
And isn't it interesting that is remembered? You don't need a video to remember that.
No.
We don't need
It's inherent. It's inherent in you.
And in fact, the video might get in the way.
Yeah.
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 One of the things Amara said, though, is very interesting because it suggests that the sort of care for the individual that's made more acute by your consciousness of an intergenerational difference, that care for the individual, it's almost as though that's more pronounced now, even though it was always there, the importance of the individual and the importance of the awareness of the individual. It sounds like it might almost be more pronounced in this revival thing.
And in addition to that, I wonder, Gaby, when you originally made the work and you invited the dancers that you invited, whether those dancers all knew each other, whether there was a kind of, you know, a community of dancers.
Yeah, there was.
Because my experience is that, because Sheeps, which is the group that I'm in, the archival group, if you know what I'm talking about. So there's a group of people in this project that I know very well.
Yeah.
That there's a history within a history in this group now. But then there are also people that I don't know at all. And there are teachers, say staff members from Roehampton, myself and Katja Njuvquist, working with first and second year students, which brings another dynamic to the... There's lots of histories in this current group. And the three original women have another whole history unfolding between them and Gaby that we're not part of, that we just witness. And I imagine that all of these histories weren't there when you...
Well, no, because we all knew each other. The scene was so small in 1984. People said to me, "Well, how did you get to do that?" I said, "Well, there was only like 5 of us." So you cannot.
Mary Ferguson's workshop when we did that, and that carrying on.
There were only about 5 or 6 of us, and the scene was so small that so. A number of the people in the original were from Dartington, which was a huge, of huge influential importance to us all. The department down there, run by Mary Ferguson, Dartington Festival, where the early wave of kind of lots of influences from Steve Paxton and different people would come over from the States, and Rosemary Butcher, I was teaching down there, Miranda Tufnell, Sue McLennan, all these people. So the scene was very small. So so Sian, Jane, Claire Bush, all these people were from Dartington. And then I had been at the place when I was quite young, and Lindy and Lucy had been at the place, so there was that connection. So I think it was a case of there weren't many people around. One of the performers was actually an artist and a filmmaker. So interestingly enough, improvisation classes were taught quite regularly at Riverside, at the Drill Hall, at Chisenhale, previously X6, and people would turn up and they wouldn't be dancers. They would be, I don't know, plumbers or psychotherapists or, I don't know, different, this was quite common. And actually, interestingly enough, I feel that I know with the Tino Segal project, people within that weren't necessarily dance trained. So this was going on a long time ago, in a completely different context, and it wasn't really, it wasn't unusual. It really wasn't unusual. Yeah.
Yeah, that raises another issue that I was interested in about the kind of the historiographic importance of this project, because having grown up through the 80s and having some memory of the sorts of developments that you're talking about, it seems to me increasingly that that period is neglected in dance history and in scholarship generally. There isn't much writing about it. There are few archival resources. Those that exist are difficult to access. And yet the period of the 90s is much more discussed and much more theorised than the earlier period. And it seems to me that a number of mistakes are being made about, claims are made about that later period which aren't true, because the claim is that that was the period in which the mechanism of the theatre is deconstructed, and that was the period in which somatic practice starts to break down codified technique, and it isn't true, because it happened much earlier than that, and those developments in the 90s came out of something, not just Judson, but something else as well.
I think we weren't of the generation of documentation. We didn't have email. We didn't, you did performances. You didn't think to have photographs or videos, or, you just got on with the making. The actual act of making was so exciting. Also there was maybe youth on your hand, but it was, you were DIY, it was a DIY construction set, and you just plastered and you didn't think, have I got this documented? Have I got it on Facebook? Have I got a web presence? It didn't even, you wanted to do the performances. I mean, funding was sketchy, but there was a very small community, and you could live very, very, very cheaply in London. And we haven't even come on to economics. But I think because that period has not been archived and has not been really given its value in a way, then it has disappeared. And I think also there was a lot of us were women. The landscape was very female, and of course there were lots and lots of there were lots of brilliant dancers, but my memory of it was that a lot of women were in positions, I don't even think, I suppose you could call positions of power, whether they were running companies, choreographing. It just seemed that was a more equal balance then. Oh no, Emily's.
I'm not sure.
Mary, I think it was more, if you look at the Dance Umbrella brochure.
In the independent scene maybe? But
the independent scene,
tiny scene compared to what was going on in dance.
Yeah,
and
I think,
of that was being run by
yeah.
And I would also say it was 1984 or 5 that DB8 was formed. So I think there was another whole influence coming in with men. So men in dance who actually very quickly became stars. So I think, this is very close on shouting out.
Yeah.
Out loud. So I'm not.
Yeah. No. But I think you're right. But I wonder if that's one of the reasons it's a little bit more invisible, because of the process of actually thinking I might have a career out of this. Like, I don't think it really. You just made. It's the same for young people now, or students, or you're just trying to make things happen. There is that in the air when you have things to express, or you want to make dances or make music. But it was just a very different time. So maybe how you made things happen inevitably was different. And I guess the question that I have is, inevitably, are the ways that we are living, you are living now, how are they impacting on your dance making? Tell me. What are your thoughts? Or anything really?
I think the economics is key.
Yeah.
I think the economics is really, really different. Like, back then it was very easy to live on the dole, and
Absolutely.
you're going to pick up 100 jobs, but yeah.
And squatting.
And squatting.
And studio space was absolutely freezing, but you kind of, I think you're right. And also,
Health and safety wasn't a problem.
no, you just did things on the street. Also, the EU wasn't formed, so we didn't have migrations from other countries, which is now, like, a lot of women in the Reconstruction aren't from here. There's a Finnish, an Italian, an Australian, a Swedish. Yeah. So that's changed. That's changed hugely in 30 years. Anna is Portuguese.
I am.
But it was
Yeah,
quite
but I
rare,
think-
wasn't it?
It was quite rare. But not just in dance, in all the fields. When we started the band, I never thought about career. It was just something, just the fact that you could get other people and do this thing together was a miracle. I remember doing our very first song when we finished from the beginning to end, and I think, gosh, this is such a miraculous thing. And that's what you were doing it for. You weren't doing it for a career, for money, or for anything. But people now, they have to look after themselves more in that sense, because you can't live for free and everything is expensive, and so people have to think in a different way.
Absolutely.
than I mean, in those days, people, there would be writers and dance and music, everything. People could actually try for those things without thinking whether they were going to make money out of it.
Yeah.
It was just on that cusp, wasn't it? Before that sort of neoliberal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was the sort of
Publishing
it was the sort of rage of Thatcher, but the actual Thatcherism was coming in with a storm, and we were always on protest marches. There was a lot of political activism. You didn't, everybody was every week on a march
With a different banner.
with a different banner, and it was really there
Not
was
opposite though.
it was solidarity. It was solidarity in the masses, because everybody had a figurehead, and that was Thatcher. So it was very galvanizing in a way.
Do you know, I think there's another big difference now, and maybe it's something around the issue of originality and authorship. Is that back then, because we didn't have access to other people's work, so we didn't have to compare ourselves to whether it had been done before, or whether there was anybody else working the same way, or you just got a passion and you get on with it. I think it's incredibly difficult now, because you can go onto YouTube and you can see hundreds and thousands of other people that are doing the same thing as you. What does that mean? Do we have, that letting go of originality?
But I feel that when we did have some in the early Dance Umbrellas, when you did see Douglas Dunn come over, and when you did see Steve and Lisa do Steve Paxton and Lisa Nelson do a duet, and when you did see these iconic people, or the very first time I saw Trisha Brown, it was absolutely. But I think that could be the same for everyone in the room. You can remember those moments when you saw something on stage or in a presentation where you got the shiver up your spine, and I think that there's something about something being live, which I prefer. So I think there's, in every generation, there's things that we have going on that really inform our practice, whether they're actually only happening now or happened before, and we just have to make sure that, I think what you said was really important, you have to clear space in order to make something happen. I wouldn't go into how much space you need to clear, because it's different for every individual, but in order to create something, in that moment, there has to be a clearing of space for you to connect to that moment, and that's I couldn't come back to this piece until there was a certain space which has been opened up for me, probably by my daughter leaving home, actually. And so I think there's these pivotal moments in our lives, and maybe when you're younger, there's a different kind of relationship to space and time that potentially thrusts you into accelerating many, many works or lots of energy in different directions. But I think that nugget of space for your practice and how you safeguard that space, especially for women, is crucial. And I know Virginia Woolf has written enough about that, but I just kind of feel that that's kind of what you're doing in a way, whether you're writing or dancing or whatever it is, making music. You need to almost fend off all these things bombarding you. That's been my experience. Are there any questions or thoughts?
A question about the sort of ethos or values, as you call it, principles, I think you called it, of the piece. And I mean, this piece is a reconstruction of the previous work, but it's also a work that will be performed now.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering whether it's aware of its value in today's landscape.
I hope so.
So what is, like,
what's its value?
It was radical then, but in what ways may it be radical today? That's one.
Yeah, I mean, I think it still has a radicalness about it, because it's interesting. I thought, it's going to look really old-fashioned. I was a little bit concerned it might look a bit dated and a bit like, but I think it's I think just at times it unleashes incredible female power, which I think is radical in any age. So that's just one kind of thing I can think of, but I think that is still and will always continue to be radical. And that's one of the things when I say about we have moved on a lot in terms of women, but I think there are, I mean, in some ways it's worse. So what could be more radical than that, than actually pinpointing, female power? Any other thoughts?
The first time it was performed, you film it. Are you going to film it this time to preserve it, or are you going to leave it again? So we're still. There's Martin Coles, who was at Dartington, who's been in a number of works. Him and his wife Birgitta are threatening to turn up with some cameras on Wednesday. We'll see. It's really not first and foremost in my mind. Sorry, I missed that. Because if you were going to reconstruct it again in the future, then surely it would be better not to film
we'd have 90-year-olds. No, if we did it in another 30 years,
True. Yeah.
I mean, there was a very young flamenco dancer she's in Dance Umbrella, and she's 30, and she said, of course I'm going to be performing when I'm 60, of course I'm going to still be dancing. And I think that's really important to me as well, the notion that as dancers we have longevity, we can continue. Of course things change. Of course things need to change. Our bodies change, our lives change, and therefore we change. And if we can continue making work, then it won't be so obsessed with the young. I mean, I understand the physicality of it, but I think when you see all the performers, they have an amazing history and different relationship to performance. So I'm hoping that it won't be the possibility of having intergenerational performances won't be something odd. It could be that it's the new norm. I don't know.
Great. Yeah, I mean, in everything, it's great to lose this age business now that I'm getting younger and younger. I just think it's really important, because there's such a sort of ageism about everything, and people always have something to say.
Yeah.
And women have a lot to say.
So Anna and the Raincoats are still stomping the boards, you know. So it's. I think that's the other thing, is that there are different paths for people to take, but it is really inspiring when things resurface. It's been really inspiring for me to kind of. I always thought there was something. I always thought there was something where I wouldn't reconstruct things. I always thought it wasn't. If I'm really honest, I thought there was something that wasn't valuable. But now I'm in the process of reconstructing this particular work. I'm feeling how incredibly important, of course to me it is, but potentially
It is.
how important this piece of work is. Yeah.
Just a comment, it's discussed it, but I'm really interested in this idea of how, when you're in the time and in the thing, we don't step out of it to kind of analyse it. But 30 years on, you say, oh, that was the period, or we were kicking against that, and you know, this work then brings that whole thing into relief because of that time and now. So there's a really interesting. I can't really articulate it at the moment, but that thing of being in it at the time, and it's what you're doing, it's what you are, and it's what you believe in. But we're not stepping back to analyse or articulate.
Absolutely, absolutely.
But that now we do.
Yeah.
And we can say 30 years ago.
Well, I can. I can. I don't know if everybody else is making from that point. Then I didn't. You know, when you're living it, you don't have the. It's unconscious.
Absolutely.
And so, therefore, I guess that the bigger philosophical question would be: are we conscious of the work we are making, or are we not? And that's a huge. But I think it's been amazing for me to look back and see, through this piece of work I was making, the unconscious things that I was saying. Of course, it's all there. And so that poses then a really difficult question for me, is it possible now to make work being conscious, not conscious? Because I truly believe transcendence needs to happen, and that's in the unconscious. So that's a bit of a sidetrack, but
that's a great place to end, actually.
Yeah.
Before we go any further.
Well, for the thought, for the I can't even say it, for the philosophical thinkers amongst us, that's a good note to end up. Yeah. Well, thank you very, very much, and as many of you that can make it on the 22nd, 6 o'clock. Be interested after hearing, because I'm not really used to speaking, I'm more used to showing, so yeah, see if that adds up, the thinking and the talking and the experience of watching, or at Chisenhale. Thanks so much.
Be very